Thank you. Thank you. All right. I am here today because you want to learn secrets about client service. So, who am I? One, well, I don't work for Clio, and that's a good thing because we need to have different aspects, different perspectives that we're bringing to this. But I'm a tax attorney in Houston, Texas. I help clients with estate planning, probate, and international tax for individuals. So US persons owning stuff outside of the US, foreign persons owning stuff inside the US, and people who are moving back and forth. I'm talking about client service issues today, but I've given a lot of other topics or talks on things that are more technically tax focused. We could talk about those later. The reason I get to talk about this is because I was a lawyer. Before I was a lawyer, I was the night manager of the Four Seasons Hotel in Austin for 3 years. So graduated college, knew I was going to go to law school, wasn't quite ready to go to law school yet, needed some time off before I went. So there's me, one of my last nights with my regular staff, most of the regular staff that I worked with. If you know anything about the Four Seasons, again, Canadian company, not just because they're Canadian that Clio picked me, but leaders in service. And if you know anything about that hotel, it's Four Seasons 24/7. When I was working overnights, so I'd get in at 11 o'clock, leave at 8 or 9 in the morning, and I'd be responsible for everything in the hotel, top to bottom. Any problem ended up on my desk, even though my desk really was the entire hotel. You know that we didn't become the Two Seasons in the middle of the night. We had to deliver on that same service promise in the middle of the night that we did at 2 in the afternoon, even though at 2 in the morning, we had 15 people in the hotel working versus 200 or so during the day. So how did we do that? How does this work? I'm going to get into that, but first I need to go through a few ground rules. One, most everybody in here is a lawyer, and I know that lawyers love to lawyer problems and find that one little thing where we can say, aha, I gotcha, you're wrong. Everything you have said is wrong, therefore I don't have to listen to you. That's fine. You can leave, the doors are back there. Don't lawyer me on this. This is going to be different for everybody. Everybody's practice, service delivery, and everybody's practice will be different. That's okay. 2, we've heard a lot about client experience. Client experience is important, but client experience is part of client service. It's part of what we're delivering. Client experience focuses on what the client receives. It doesn't focus on the back end of what the business is actually doing to deliver that service. They're important. I'm not saying client experience isn't important. I'm just using it in a different way, or using a different term for a reason. 2, or 3, what are numbers? Client, customer, guest, patron. I know all of our rules are based on clients. I'll use these terms almost interchangeably because they all mean the same person. They're the person who ultimately writes our paycheck. They're the ones who are paying us. Those are the people we're focusing on when I talk about that. And finally, there's a lot of stuff that I could talk about, but I don't want to talk about them. There are plenty of other talks that we could go through and expand on all of these other things, but we're not going to do it. They're very great stories. Joshi is a great story. I don't need to go through that. If you want me to tell you the Joshi story later, I'll tell you the Joshi story later. We're not talking about that right now. Traction has a lot of good ideas. We're not talking about that right now. All right. So when Daniel Pink, I put him up there before I knew he was speaking here, but, oh, laser, there you go. Okay, 2 goals for this presentation. If service is new to you, if you haven't thought about this before, I want to give you the framework for how you can put this together, how you can go back to your firm and start piecing together what service looks like for you. If you've got a bit more of what's going on, if you know more, hopefully I can give you a few tweaks, a few new ways to think about things so that you can improve more. So the service secrets. I was telling Gary as he walked off, it's almost like they read my presentation and just adapted the Clio Trends report to what I'm doing. But I've got 3 secrets here. We're going to go through all of them, but I'm not going to give them to you right now. Because this is ultimately these secrets, they're not going to be that secret. You're just going to see at the end of it, this is stuff you probably already knew, but you'll have a new framework for it. And why? Well, We want to take care of our clients. We want them happier. We want our employees engaged. It's not just our clients that we care about, it's our people. Ultimately, those clients, though, are going to drive more to us. We're going to have fewer complaints, and if Megan's here somewhere, lower risk of work for Megan Xavier. So, this unfortunately is our problem. If you haven't worked for somebody like this, I mean, you know, my wife looked at this photo and was like, "Oh, that was the guy you used to work for." I'm like, yeah. But this is what we're fighting. You know, somehow law is something other than a business. It's not. Law is a business. It happens to be a professional business, but it doesn't mean we're not subject to the rules of a business. And so we'll hear this a lot, but it doesn't mean that it's not true. So service, it's kind of easy when we're all sitting around a table, you know, whether or not our associate over here on the right is talking to a partner, a client, whoever. It's easy when you're right there in front of people. The problem is, what do we do when we let them loose, or when we get let loose to deal with clients outside of the confines of an easy-to-deal-with relationship? You know, we've already heard about what happens when clients call us, when clients email us. Not much happens. Of course, the response is, that's wonderful for businesses, but what do you want me to do? Take these words, take these phrases, and go and adapt it, and that's how you do it. Well, the words are fine. I mean, the problem is, it doesn't give you much to do. So when you release your associate, you know, we'll pretend it's just the associate who's out there. Is he supposed to rely on what he's seen when he's been in a restaurant? I mean, most of us go from high school to college to law school and then right into our first job in middle management with no training on how to manage employees, how to run a business, how to do any of this. So we look for examples elsewhere. I mean, is it supposed to be a fine dining experience? Are we trying to get people to bring food and, you know, make sure they're smiling? You know, are we going to provide a higher end experience and find our clients on the beach, bring them fancy drinks? Is it going to be a service model like Starbucks, where we're, you know, making sure we misspell names in funny ways? Maybe. Or is it Home Depot, where we're helping somebody just select out the product that should work for them? Or God forbid, are we just like McDonald's, where all we're doing is filling in forms and handing things off to people? The issue, though, is not that there's anything wrong with any of these. They're all fine models. But what the differentiating factor is, ultimately between those businesses, is how they implement their service. And so as an example, you know, think about the hotel you're probably staying in tonight. You know, ultimately, a hotel's job is to provide you with a place to sleep. And when you go to sleep at night, if you open your eyes, wake up the next morning in the Four Seasons in Austin, it didn't look like this when I was there, but it's what it looks like now. You have an idea just from looking at this, the way you'll be treated when you walk in the door. If you pick up the phone at 2 in the morning and call the front desk, what will it sound like when that person answers the phone? If you have a request, will they be able to meet that request? Keep those answers in your mind. Imagine you instead woke up in this room. You probably have different expectations on what will happen when you go to bed, what will happen when you pick up the phone, and probably even what it will smell like when you walk into this room. And it doesn't mean that there's anything wrong, but it does mean you need to know what's going to happen. Again, but we're not like them. We're lawyers. I know. And so we say wonderful things like this on our websites. We can't give you any helpful case-specific advice until we have a strong understanding of all relevant circumstances. Ugh, who wants to deal with that? Nobody wants to deal with that. Clients get turned off by that, even though it may be right. I get it. I know. We don't want to put people in a place where we give them the wrong advice too early. But showering them with, you know, legalese doesn't help anybody. So there are a few harsh realities that we should go through quickly to get to the underlying pieces. Well, one, we've worked in a protected monopoly for years. We haven't had to compete like real businesses. Sure, we're competing firm to firm, but we're now getting, you know, LegalZoom, all the others that can come in, plus the internet where people can just do the work themselves. As they mentioned this morning, we're getting compared to all other service providers. We're not just good enough for a law firm, we're good enough compared to our banks, our accountants, the hotels, whatever. We're getting compared across those lines. Next, we haven't run our businesses like businesses, and so those non-legal providers are eating our lunch. And finally, our monopoly is probably going away one way or another. You'll say, okay, well, John, this is not what we came for. Dan is in the back saying this, if not screaming it onto Twitter. So a lot of this hit me last year at Clio Con, when I went out to dinner at Commander's Palace in New Orleans with a few friends, and while we were waiting for dinner, I could just point out what exactly that restaurant was doing. It's like, oh, that's interesting. That table over there has a blue ribbon. That table has 2 balloons. That table has balloons that are a different color but the same number. And just pulling it over and asking our waiter, like, what does that mean? Why are those things there? Why, when you walked up, did you move the salt and pepper shakers from the exact middle of the table to just a slightly different spot? Well, it was all part of their business. They had those systems set up in a way to communicate to everybody in that restaurant what was going on. And so, here we go. Secret time. Business. Law firms are business. They're a type of business. But a firm doesn't just have a revenue generation issue. That's not all they do. I want to think about things in 2 ways. The business model and then the business framework. Now, the business model is specific to what your company does. So it's whatever you do for money. If you're selling things for money, if you're performing services like legal services for money, if you're renting hotel rooms, whatever you're specifically doing that separates you from every other business. The framework is going to be whatever the company does to implement the model. And these are going to be common to all businesses. They'll be slightly different. But ultimately, every business does these things in roughly the same way. So, revenue generation comes from 3 places. 1, physical product, so whatever stuff you get from a business. Clio, mostly digital information. There's not a whole lot of physical stuff, but think about the Lego product you could go buy when you go to a restaurant, the food that they're putting in front of you. The technical product, for lawyers, knowledge in our head and our ability to come up with answers. Clio, digital computing and all the stuff that people do with computers behind the scenes. Finally, the third part of what we're paying for is our service product. You've got to put all of these 3 things together to figure out what you're paying for. Every business will have a different mix of physical, technical, and service product, but ultimately that's where the value is coming from. Now, businesses will have lots of other departments. We're not going to talk about them really as much, but administration in the hotel, we call that back of house, things that the people who are paying us don't see, versus front of house, which is what the people generally do see. All sorts of fun titles for those people, but ultimately, these are the business units that exist everywhere in every business. So we're going to talk about client service. We're going to come back to management at the end. So, what is client service? As a good lawyer, of course, I came up with my own definition. It's going to be the experience that a business provides beyond that technical or physical product. Again, you may be thinking, well, isn't that client experience? I've left client or customer off of this because it's not just about what we do for our clients. It's everything we're doing both internally to our teams as well as externally. And it's not just to the people who are paying us. So somebody who comes in, if I get a call that says, hey, mom just died, her will is wrong, I want to sue my brother and get a different will admitted, that person's not going to be my client. I don't do will contests at all. That person's not going to pay me. I probably shouldn't be involved in their probate. But the faster I can get them to the right person, that's a service I'm providing to them, even though I'm not going to be making any money off of them. So that's part of that service. To put it another way, here in the hotel, physical product is going to be the food on the plate. The technical product would be the recipes that go into it. The service, I've put a person here, but ultimately, we're doing more and more with apps and bots and things that make it easier without human intervention to get that product. Ultimately, though, great service is what that business is going to do to make it easy. If you can order room service from your phone without having to pick up the phone and call, isn't that easier? And so if we go back to our hotels, what's the difference? They've both made decisions about what's going on. If we change it over to law firms, well, what we should see is that the law firm on your right, my left, that's all physical product right there. The fact that your firm has fancy furniture doesn't change the service that's coming out of it. If the firm on the right goes from having the back office that looks like the mess to having the conference room like this, it doesn't change anything that's going on. What it's doing is just putting a facade over it. And so if the firm over there had the fancy front office but the disastrous back office, it doesn't change anything. Come on. There we go. And so again, we're back to making sure we're focusing on the right products. When we look at service, we have to know what that service is. And so let's figure out what it isn't. It's not your physical product. It's not, for me as a person who drafts wills, having fancy 20-weight bond paper that only adds to the cost and doesn't make a will any more or less enforceable. Right? If it's on regular copy paper, it's just as enforceable, it's just as valid as if I'd spent $300 per page on it. The technical product, so the legal knowledge in our heads, what are we bringing to bear for clients? That's not our service. It's part of our product, not part of our service. Finally, the attention to detail within our physical and technical product. So if I'm helping a business client and I remember their birthday, that is attention to detail that generally doesn't apply to the business or to their business representation. But when I remember that one of my clients, who's an estate planning client, has a 1-year, their child is turning 1, and we send them flowers, that's a great thing for that client because we're paying attention to them, but it's within the context of what we're doing for them. So, secret number 1, we know what service is, and we can now kind of recognize and not get bowled over. Walking into an office and seeing, oh, they've got fancy offices, they must be better at this service thing than me, is not it. Lawyers love to confuse that. Lots of people love to confuse the fancy trappings with service. The service ultimately comes from how the business is designed and how it's running. So, secret number 2, what are we going to do? How are we going to make things better? Well, we've got to stop doing it the old way. So you may be familiar with this guy, Michelin rating for restaurants. In the hotels, we had 5-star and 5-diamond. These were services that came out to provide, well, this is what's going to happen. This is how we rank things. And they're very upfront on what it takes to be ranked as 5-star or 5-diamond. You can go download the checklist in the hotel. We knew exactly what we were going to do. The hotel I worked at wasn't going to be 5-star or 5-diamond because they required on-site shopping that the hotel was never going to pay for. But we could hit a lot of the service things. God, why do we care about this? We're not lawyers. Because again, we need to focus on our service. 1, 3 things to look at. Who are our people? How are they taking care of our clients? How are they delivering? What does that delivery look like for people, for our clients? And finally, what systems do we have in place so that we can consistently and measurably serve everyone? Again, not just clients, the people who call us and get the wrong number. They've Googled last will and testament, and they ended up at me when really what they want to do is sue somebody because they don't like what the will says. So a few quick things. 1, we already know this is not a right answer. You've probably worked with some people who look like this all the time. You also don't want something like this. What you're looking for is the easy smile of George, who worked at the Four Seasons when I was there. It's still there, and I took this photo straight off the Four Seasons website because he's there as the welcoming face of that hotel. Pulling randomly from one law firm in Houston, same law firm, 2 different lawyers. Which one do you want to work with? Orange tie or blue tie? If you're hiring a lawyer, there may be some bad news coming down the line eventually, just maybe. Which one do you want to deliver that bad news to you? Which one's going to be easier to work with? And I mean, these are the photos that this firm put out which one would you rather hire? So we want to make sure that every interaction, even when we're going to have bad ones, we want to go into it starting with a smile. Doesn't mean that we're not going to have a perfect result, but at least recognizing that you've got to start with a smile. Number 2, focusing on delivery. We want to empower employees. Not everything has to go through us as the lawyer. Sometimes we're going to the extent our licenses allow us, we want to make sure that our employees, associates, paralegals, staff, whoever it is, make sure that they can get the information to clients so it doesn't have to run through you, speeding up delivery. Finally, setting up systems, but beyond systems, we want to know what the standards are. If somebody calls, how long should it take for them to get a response? 5 hours? 10 hours, 24 hours? The answers will vary based on your practice. If you have a PI firm or a criminal defense firm, people need answers right now. For me, probate, estate planning, things can sit. They're going to get back, I'll generally get back to people within 24 hours, but I don't need to be there right on top of them. That's what works for me. So a few Clio things I've figured out. One, Clio, payments and law pay have made things much easier. Zapier is a godsend for my firm because I can get consistent results. Triggering a time entry to be created when I save an email through Outlook is great. And then Clio Connect, allowing clients to see what documents we have for them. But on our systems and our standards, how can we consistently measure things? I've set up certain activities in my estate planning clients. When do we have our first meeting? When do we send drafts? When do they sign drafts? When have we reviewed them? Setting up those events so that we can track when they happen relative to when they start, and looking at how that timeline gets spread out. So, secret number 2, what we were just going through. Those were all just 3 little things that you can do, but you're going to focus on people, delivery, and systems. You're not going to focus on necessarily better legal results. That's already your professional obligation. You're not going to focus on your physical products because that doesn't change anything. Having fancier sofas, having nicer artwork doesn't change anything. You've got to focus on these 3 things to get better at service. So finally, well, we can't do it by ourselves. Being the solo doesn't let us do it all by ourselves. I know. So, Four Seasons was founded by Isidore Sharp back in the 60s in Toronto. He's in his 90s. He hasn't checked in anybody in decades, so he had me do it. Actually, me, my last night, that's why I took the picture. The night before the last night. One of the things to notice, those 2 knobs were a small improvement we made in the hotel because people would walk in with their luggage and they would have things on hangers. But it was one of the front desk agents who noticed this, and we figured out a way that those would actually push out so people could hang their hangers and not be managing too much stuff while they were checking in. So this does get into a bit of firm values. Four Seasons had our service initialism of smile, eye contact, recognize, voice, informed, clean, and everyone. So everybody could follow this and know how to gauge what was going on in your interaction. This set the standard for what you were going to do. And this started from the top, and it was important enough that we didn't just have this on cards that you could carry around. In the hotel that I worked in, every employee came in through a stairwell just over there and walked past 3-foot-high letters every day. Now, when I was there, it was painted a little bit differently, but this is from the beginning of last year. It's important enough that they painted it on the walls, that you saw it every time you walked in and out of the hotel. And generally, you were going to be walking past this a few times a day anyway, because there were all sorts of other offices right around here. And you may be saying, well, okay, that's the Four Seasons. Maybe I'm not the white shoe law firm. But Starbucks does the same sort of thing, of figuring out how to communicate the message down of what's going on in your firm. So they used to have this embroidered on the inside of some of the aprons. At this point, you may not get that. I've asked a few times. But we create inspired moments in each customer's day. So anticipating, connecting, personalizing, and owning. What it's doing is communicating to your employees what they should be doing. This is how it's going to work for them. And if we come back to our business framework, this is part of management. So kind of broadening out to what management is, 3 jobs for the manager. All right, there we go. Putting out client fires, putting out employee fires, and then correcting employee work. Of course, those are not the real ones. Increasing productivity. We talked about that this morning with Jack. Those little micro improvements that build up over time. Something, if you're familiar at all with Toyota, the Toyota way, a Japanese concept called Kaizen, where you're just making small improvements that build on each other. The more you can build one little thing that you can add on to the next week, and add on to the next week after that, that's going to make it easier. You're not looking for wholesale changes. You're looking for little tweaks as the manager, as the person who's responsible for the employees. 2, reducing turnover. It's one of the costliest things we can do is have to let somebody go and then replace them, because we're going to invest a lot of time in getting that next person up to speed. And finally, completing the organization's work. So whatever your business does, if you're a manager, you have firm work to do in addition to being a manager. You're almost never going to be a queen bee who just oversees everybody and sits on your perch. You've got some amount of work that is yours. So, the manager, the employee to whom another employee reports. And we have, hierarchies like this. If you've worked in a law firm, we look like this. And we have trees that look like this, which means that nobody has any accountability. An associate doesn't know who they report to. They don't know who to go to for feedback. It always gets passed in a different direction. If you ask for who's the one who's in charge of me, well, they say, well, who gives you the most work? That's not really helpful. How is somebody going to grow when all they get is more work? I mean, it's not unimportant. Obviously, we're not going to pay bills if we don't have more work. So how can we do this? Well, developing that relationship between whoever the manager is and whoever the direct report is. Partner to associate, associate to paralegal, associate to secretary, whatever that relationship is, defining it and then making sure that it's developed. The partners I've worked for in the past were great about saying, oh, well, I worked so well with my assistant, but we've been together for 20 years. Well, of course you work well together. You've had 20 plus years together. Providing regular positive and negative feedback. I heard at just about every firm I've worked at, like, if I don't tell you anything's wrong, nothing is wrong, which is terrible. Like, you need to provide that feedback to your employees that, not only are they not doing the wrong things, they are doing good things. So they know where to keep going and where to focus their efforts. Developing what they're doing, not just saying, well, this person doesn't know how to do it, I'll do it myself so they don't have to, it'll just be faster. The only way they're going to get better is by you handing that work down to them and getting them better at things. And so that's really the key. You've got to start somewhere. Just because it's not great now doesn't mean it can't be better later. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and end early because, well, it's lunch. Thank you.